been talking a little bit about trauma, but it's interesting how even the last couple of weeks I've talked about it in these sessions and my thinking has already changed, or, it's deepened. So yeah, here's some of what I've been learning. So with mindfulness and meditation, the classic approach to healing is that intensity comes up, anxiety, sadness, grief, and normally we try and run away from that feeling. We try and distract ourselves, numb ourselves out with alcohol, drink, procrastination, distraction. Meditation invites us to just be with it, to stay with it. And we learn through practice that we can hold this intensity, and the truth of our being is the consciousness that watches that intense experience, rather than us needing to believe every thought that pops into our heads, or believing our thoughts saying that you can't handle this, you'll be overwhelmed by this if you stay with it. And so maybe a traumatic event arises, and if in mindfulness we simply try and watch that experience, and maybe we'll get lost in the intensity but come back, lost in the intensity, come back, and then eventually over time that softens. So that's great and really powerful. However, we also need to be trauma-sensitive mindfulness practitioners, both in terms of how we relate to ourselves with our own trauma, and also if you on your journey begin to, maybe sit down and meditate with friends or family, and you want to share the gifts of meditation, as I invite you to do in a kind and open way without trying to force it on other people. But nonetheless, this is a gift that is timeless, and it's timeless because it works and speaks to something fundamental about the challenge of being human, is how do we relate to ourselves? And meditation gives us the grounding to be able to relate to ourselves more kindly. Maybe when you're sharing meditation, you need to be conscious of trauma and trauma within yourself. So what does trauma-sensitive mindfulness look like? It is the awareness that actually sometimes time isn't a healer. What I just talked about of you get lost in the intensity, you watch, get lost, you come back, get lost, come back. Eventually it dissipates. Time is a healer. That is a universal truth in many ways. However, for trauma, it doesn't necessarily apply, because when a traumatic experience comes up, then we can re-traumatize ourselves. And so actually we get stuck in that same intensity and it doesn't soften over time. And so if somebody, or maybe you've experienced this, goes to a meditation group and they're asked to just watch their thoughts, and then a traumatic response comes up, it may be that they re-traumatize themselves, and actually it doesn't really help. And then they leave meditation and they don't get the full benefits from it. So an example to illustrate how we need to be sensitive with trauma is the story that comes from this book, which is, I need to remember the name properly, Trauma Aware Mindfulness. I think that's the name of the book. I can check for next week. The example they gave is someone's whose sister died. So unfortunately, this brother of the sister lent his brother. Let me start that again. So a brother lent their sister some headphones. The sister went for a walk with the headphones on and got hit by a car because she didn't check while crossing the road and was killed. Now, obviously, it's not the brother's fault, but this, anyway would be a really traumatic experience. But yeah, he felt a lot of guilt and shame around this event, and it stayed with him. And particularly this trauma was stimulated by him in silence, because growing up, he would be in bed and his sister was more of an outgoing person than him. So he would hear his sister sneak back into the house while he was trying to sleep. And that would remind him of her sister. And so in silence at night, he would wait for his sister to come, and she never would. And so then when this brother was invited to a mindfulness class and to sit in silence, that is the exact trigger that would stimulate this trauma of his lost sister. And so if we're not trauma aware, we may say, just watch it, just watch it, just watch it. but actually that can bring an intensity that's too hard to bear. Because the difference with trauma versus just a negative experience, what is the difference? You know, we have really intense experiences in our lives, but some of those experiences are traumatic and others, you know, we forget about them and they don't stay with us. And the difference between a highly intense negative experience and a traumatic experience is integration or disintegration between mind and body. And so one more example to illustrate this difference is in a car crash. If somebody is in a car crash and they can get themselves out of the car crash, it's very unlikely to be a traumatic experience. If, however, they're trapped inside and they have all this intensity saying, get out, you're in danger, you're going to die, but their body can't move, there's a disassociation, there's a disintegration between the mind and the body. And this can then form trauma. And so let's come back to the brother now. He had a disintegration between his mind telling him that, okay, my sister's gone now, it wasn't my fault and I can move on, and the reality of these hugely intense emotions coming up for him of that trauma response. And so if you feel that disintegration, maybe with some of the traumas that you've worked in with your life, or you recognize that with others, the journey of being able to reintegrate needs to be very gentle. So mindfulness absolutely is a really powerful tool on the journey to healing and to getting past trauma. But we need to be conscious of, you know, where you're starting or where another person is starting. So somatic or body exercises can be really good. So maybe some intensity is coming up, and instead of staying with that intensity, we can just move the body, shaking. You know, animals, when they come across a really intense event, they get into safety, then they shake off the tension. They literally shake it off. And so why don't you try some shaking with me now? Try just being a bit playful. You know, we do shaking in the Qigong that we do together when I lead sessions. And this is a really healing exercise. So, okay, this intensity's come up, that's fine. I'm just going to shake it off. Another option is, if you'd like to join me for this as well, is just extending love to that part of ourselves and just not needing to put any intention into being mindful, but just simply, okay, I'm just going to try and just meet myself with love right now. And we can physically, you know, embody that through moving our bodies. And so trauma-sensitive mindfulness is where, you know, that's just one example, somatic body work. And, you know, our Qigong practice that, if you'd like to join me later, we'll be doing together in community. That is a really beautiful and powerful way to reintegrate. And sometimes, although meditation in a seated practice is powerful, sometimes it can be too much. And as always, your wisdom journey is navigating what tools to use. So these are all offerings, you know, from the Taoists, Qigong from the Taoists, meditation, this universal practice, maybe singing in community, you know, whatever your practices are. It's for you to integrate and bring into your life and to see what can heal you. And if you feel that you are resourced enough, then beginning to offer these practices to your loved ones too, to see if you can, share these practices that can be so healing. Andreas sharing some beautiful thoughts in the chat. Trauma is rigidness that allows us to experience the healing of Tao, which is flexible and fluid. Beautiful thoughts. Trauma is rigidness that allows us to experience the healing of Tao, which is flexible and fluid. Yeah, so for those new on the adventure into the Tao is the word for the ways of nature, for the universe, everything within it, and the principles that shape you and I. And I've been connecting with love more recently. What is love? I don't know. But we feel love when we are in connection we could say that love is connection. So love with families and friends and pets and relationships. And then in our spiritual journeys, we begin to understand that everything in the universe is interconnected. We all come from the same mysterious source, and that even your supposed enemies and even the badgers and the squirrels, they too are part of this great unfolding of life in the universe. And when we recognize, recognitize our connection, that sense of awe and wonder arises, that love, the recognition of ourself in other. And so we could then say that the universe is love. If love is connection and everything in the universe is connected, then the universe is love. And suddenly the ideas that many traditions shared around the world, that God is love, that the ground of being is love, seem to make more sense. And so then trauma, what is trauma in regards to love? As we are love embodied, as we come into fruition, we reach and meet resistance, obstacles, and these cause frictions and rigidities that in this love trying to express itself, it gets hurt, and so it locks in to protect itself. And I talked last week about if you've seen a tree in the forest that has two branches reaching outwards, there was some traumatic event that happened early in its life that caused it to go from its kind of initial destiny to a new destiny. And, you know, it can still flourish even with that initial traumatic event. And in the same way that we can flow through that rigidity, and maybe we didn't have the tools as a child, as a teenager, as a young adult, or however old you are, to be able to go back to that rigidity and to explore it. But this is the journey that we're on. And if we are love embodied, then if we bring our awareness to these parts of ourselves that feel rigid, that feel vulnerable, that feel armored, that feel blocked, can we trust that the light of our awareness, that our love, if we extend it to this part of ourselves, that healing is possible, that flow is possible, that change is possible? Because ultimately we do live in this infinitely powerful universe. There's so much beauty in love, is immensely powerful. And so can we trust that love can serve us, and we can witness the parts of ourselves that maybe we would otherwise run away from, and to stay with it. Key principles, stay with it. Our physical growth was done for us by the Tao, by the wiggly, mysterious intelligence of the universe. But our spiritual growth, you know, but in that growth, there was friction and trauma. So like our spiritual growth is a conscious process now of us having to go back to these parts of ourselves and to spend time, you know, reading books, going on courses and retreats and meditating and dedicating yourself to your practice, because it's worth it. It's worth it because healing is possible, and a beautiful life of you connecting with the truth of your being, that you are love, and then being empowered in that love not only can transform your life but inspires the people around you. And ultimately, if enough of us realize that a life of love and peace and balance is possible, and we demonstrate that way of being, then the world changes too. And that is the method of transformation for the Taoists. It's this energy that they call duh. Do you want to try saying that with me? Duh. Tao, duh. Jing is the foundational text of Taoism. Tao, the way of nature. Duh, its power, nature's power. Jing, foundational text or classical book. So when we understand the Tao, the consequence is duh, this natural vitality and this power. And when the universe is in its flow, in accordance with its nature, that's when abundance happens, as we just need to look around in any forest or any natural habitat which is allowed to flourish. When we work in keeping with our nature, that's when beautiful things happen. Marcia sharing that she had a problem with trauma and sitting meditation, had to stop for 4 months and do walking meditation only. And there's some resistance arising to to sitting meditation. And again, that's your wisdom. So yeah, if sitting meditation is too much for you, then honoring that. And walking meditation, our Qigong practice, walking in nature, these can be other ways that we can bring our mindfulness into our everyday. The single breath practice, and it wouldn't be a George session if we didn't do a breath together. So if you'd like to join me, why don't we take a mindful breath, this fundamental practice I invite you to do throughout the day. So if you'd like to join me, breathing in together, softening the face, and a nice slow exhale, softening even more. Why don't we try one more of those? Breathing in, softening the face, breathing out, letting any tension go. So that's another beautiful mindfulness practice to bring into your everyday. And I mention it each week because it has been one of the most fundamental practices for me that continues to serve me throughout the day, every single day. It's the practice of the pause, right? Just pausing. Okay, I'm lost in thoughts that don't serve me. I'm going to soften, come back. So you've got this tool set of practices available to you, and you using your wisdom to be able to navigate which one's going to serve you. I would say having the intention to come back to seated meditation, it has for me given me a clarity that moving meditation hasn't given me, and they are beautifully interrelated. As I deepen in my seated practice, my movement practice deepens. As I deepen in my movement practice, my seated practice deepens as well. And if we can come back just for a little bit of time, maybe 2 minutes of seated practice, 5 minutes of seated practice, life ends at the edge of your comfort zone. Ends? Begins. That's probably a good way of flipping that round. Life begins at the end of your comfort zone. A nice self-help cliche for you. But it's true, it's going to where the resistance is, like we were talking earlier about friction in our lives. It's actually if we meet that part of us that has friction and welcome it, welcome friction, I see you. And instead of trying to run away from resistance and discomfort, is to stay with it. And that is the source of growth, and not needing to be David Goggins about it, someone who, is extreme with going to discomfort. But if it feels in your wisdom to stay with it, and if you know that actually deep down I'm not going here because of fear instead of love, then maybe that's an invitation in your practice, over a lifetime to visit and explore. Can you witness all parts of yourself with love? Yeah, that's an aspiration for life, right? And not easy. Yeah, can you witness all parts of yourself with love? Powerful.